Well, it is 6 o'clock, so I think we could get started. Um, Hello to my fellow delegation. It's wonderful to see all of you. I wish we could be in person, but it is really nice to at least see your faces. Um, so what we're going to do here, our format for the next 90 minutes is we're each going to speak about 5 minutes on some of our legislative priorities this past session, what we worked on to get passed. And then we're going to move into taking questions from the chat. So make sure that if you have any questions, that you're putting them in there and they will be sent to us to be able to answer as we move through. What I will do, I am State Representative Amy Berger-Javallo. I represent the 111th House District, which is about, if you live in Ridgefield, there's a 96% chance that you're in my district and a 4% chance that you're in Rep. Constantine's district. And then we have basically a 50-50 split between Senators Kushner and Marr. But I'll let them speak to that a little bit. I will let them actually do their introductions first, and I will sit back. So looking at the order that I have on my screen, I'm just going to go right to you, Senator Marr. Please
Okay.
go ahead. The floor is yours.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. First off, I have to say I'm really disappointed we're not together in person. It is what it is, and we will just go on from here, and hopefully we'll be together again sometime soon because I far prefer to be with you in person. So let me just talk a little bit. As Representative Berger-Javallo said, I have the lower half of Ridgefield. I serve Wilton, Westport, Weston, Reading, the lower half of Ridgefield, part of New Canaan, part of Darien, part of Stamford. And I had a number of things that I accomplished this session. So I just want to tell you about them. And there is one particular one that I want to highlight, well, two that I'd like to highlight. The first bill that we put through was a library governance bill to make sure that every library had a governance uh, documents in place for both the public library and the school libraries to make sure that there is a process if someone requested a book be removed from the library. That was number one. So number two, we put in place the Uniform Collaborative Law Act, which I shepherded through. It took a couple of years to get that done, but basically provides mediation in a divorce situation. So instead of going straight to the courts, it allows for and sets up the criteria for how to have a mediation. The next is environment bill. I was really glad to vote for 5004, which was a bill that we had tried to get through on the environment the previous year and hadn't had success. And then we're able to accomplish this year. And then an energy bill, which reduced, and I know Representative Constantine Savet is going to speak about that. So I won't talk about it too much, but I was glad to vote for that because on SB4, we were reducing the costs on the public benefits. And then I also voted for the housing bill, which everybody knows, but I want to put out there, House 5002, that you've all heard so much about. And we can talk more and I can answer a question on that. The two that I want to really highlight, one, given what's happened this week, is in Colorado, the school shooting. This bill is an emergency response bill that we took a look at the Sandy Hook Promise bill that had been passed in 2013, and this added an additional layer of response. So it was a bill that was brought to me by Westport High School students, and it allows for a card about the size of a credit card that is on a not legislator, a teacher or administrator or custodian's tags, and they can push that button a number of times if there is a need for an immediate response, and it can be wired straight to the police department. It doesn't go through a dispatch, doesn't have to be, don't have to make a phone call. It's just a number of buttons, presses on this particular card, and that goes to the police immediately. And they already have a map of the school and they can come. So what we did by adding that card as a number, I mean, as a part of the emergency response is now school systems around the country, sorry, school systems around the state can put in a grant request for monies from Department of Emergency Services and Protection to apply for that grant. And then they can institute it in their school. And the reason I think this is important is because in Georgia last year, they had this. Within 2 minutes, the police were on the grounds and many lives were saved. So I wanted to work with high school students from Westport to put it into place, and it passed and has been signed into law. So I'm very pleased about that. The last thing I want to talk about is the early childhood education endowment. So, very first in the country, we moved $300 million into an endowment fund overseen by the treasurer. And that endowment fund for early childhood education by 2030 will have increased. We heard the governor say it yesterday, 20,000 slots for childcare across the state. And those childcare slots will include birth to 5. So we are going to be working with childcare providers to give the money to them through bonding to increase their facilities. We will be giving training and education to childcare providers so that they are absolutely ready to work with infants and increase their skills with children. And we will also be providing through this early childcare endowment a opportunity for childcare providers who are often at the very end of the pay scale, the opportunity to enter into insurance, because anyone who has a child or has a grandchild in childcare knows that those illnesses come home all the time with the child and are given to the parents and the other members of the family. So we want to do everything we can to keep our childcare providers healthy. It will also increase the pay scale for childcare providers so that they will be on par and with parity because of education with school kindergarten teachers. And additionally, any child in the Smart Start or Early Start programs up to $100,000 income will attend for free. So the reason I was excited about this, I brought this bill out, and the reason I was excited to vote for it is because we know that childcare is a workforce issue. And without making sure that our families can get to work and knowing that their child is well cared for and is learning and is safe and happy, that allows parents to get to work. And that is important for the parents, for the family, for the child, and for our state. So I was really honored to be named as one of the tri-chairs of the Early Childhood Education Advisory Board. And we'll be having our first meeting this week. And we will help the Office of Early Childhood make sure that these funds are being used wisely and well. So that's it for me, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Senator Marr. I appreciate the thorough overview. We're going to move on to Senator Kushner. Welcome.
Hi there, everyone. It's good to be with you, even though, as Senator Marr said, we would all prefer to be in person. And it was unfortunate that we couldn't secure the location well enough to make that possible tonight. But we didn't want to postpone, so we're happy to be with you in this format. I serve on many committees, as do most senators, and but I'm chair of the Labor Committee. So for this particular session, there were a few things that came out of the Labor Committee that were very important. A lot of times we're working on issues that had already been addressed in previous sessions, but need to be modified or improved. In this session, one of the great things that we did was to expand the paid family medical leave program to paraeducators and other non-certified personnel in our school systems. And this will be very helpful to them. You know, just to remind you that the paid family medical leave program was implemented it was put into law in 2019. It was actually began paying out benefits in 2022. And during that time, we have seen over $1 billion in families helped with over $1 billion. And it's about 200,000 families that have had received benefits. Providing this now for paraeducators and other non-certified personnel within the school systems is critically important. These are low-wage workers that often don't have any paid time off or very little paid time off from the school system. And the paid family medical leave program is entirely funded by employee contribution, so it won't be a strain or an economic difficulty for our school systems, but will allow them to participate in a program to care for themselves and their loved ones when someone is seriously ill, or in the event of giving birth to a child, bonding leave for adoptions and for foster children as well. So that was a great step forward. We also helped really secure the Connecticut retirement program. And this is called My CT Savings, and it's for any employer that does not have any kind of pension or 401k for its employees. They are able to participate through this program. Workers are able to put aside money for their retirement. And it's something that is growing in Connecticut that we started only a few years ago after many years of study. But we did make some adjustments this year to make it more secure and to work better for individuals when they do reach retirement. And there are two other health bills that really only affected, labor bills that only affected a few people or small categories of employees, but they were critically important. Our state marshals are per diem employees and never had any state employee health care, and we were able to replicate what a full-time employee would get when a state marshal is full-time. They would get those benefits now, which was really critically important to them. And another program was to ensure that the domestic workers that work in our state have access to information about what their rights are and what the law requires employers to do of domestic workers. And we were able to continue that program and, in fact, enhance it. And then finally, the big bill that I worked on was something called the Striking Workers Bill. This would have provided for workers who, when they're out on strike, to collect unemployment. There was a lot of misinformation given to the public about this bill. Unfortunately, many people thought it would come out of taxpayer dollars when, in fact, no tax dollars go to the unemployment funds. It is strictly a fund that is paid for by employers and by the employers of that group of workers who might be forced to go out on strike. And it was something that I felt was really critically important. It was passed by both the Senate and the House, but unfortunately the governor vetoed that bill, so it did not go into effect. But something that was a big priority for me. I would say that as in addition to being chair of the Labor Committee, I'm vice chair of the Appropriations Committee. And this year, we all spent a lot of time working on the budget. Most senators and representatives are either on the Finance Committee, which deals with the revenue that comes into the state, or on the Appropriations Committee, like I am, which we decide how to spend the money. And it's a major piece of work that we do each year. We break into a number of subcommittees to work on each part of the state's budget. The biennium budget is about $26 billion each year. And so we go through that line by line, assessing and deciding on how we're going to spend that money. So in addition to being vice chair of the overall committee, I'm chair of one of the government agency subcommittees, and we spend a good deal of time on that. A couple of things that pertain to the budget that pertain to Ridgefield. One of them goes directly to the issue that had been come up about school safety. A few years ago, I worked with the Western Connecticut State University folks to create and fund from the state something called the Center for School Safety and Crisis Preparedness. And that center has, in the few years that's been up and running, has, on a very small investment of dollars, been able to really help when there's a crisis in a school. And it can range from everything from the death of a student or a staff member to a weather event. But clearly, it's also there to address school shootings and to make sure that our schools are safe. This program helps school districts and the Connecticut Homeland Security Agency to develop their plans for ensuring that a school is safe from any kind of violence. And so that center did excellent work for the first couple of years that it's been in existence. So we were able to give additional funds so they could expand their staff. And that's something I worked to make sure happened in this budget. And I'm very proud. I'm proud of the work only because I don't do the work, but it's just very exciting to see something that really works for our schools. We've heard wonderful positive reports from superintendents, from the mobile crisis unit folks, and from the Homeland Security folks as well. So it's something that's we're happy that we've been able to expand. And then a smaller program is at the Meeting House. And I don't know if you're all familiar with the Meeting House, which is part of the Ridgefield congregation, the church there. And it's very close to my house, and I've gotten to know these folks really well. And we were able to get a grant so that the director of the program they're working on a program that will bring together middle schoolers from Ridgefield with middle schoolers from Danbury and work on leadership and engagement. So that's a fun program, and it's an exciting program, and they're looking to have that launched by January. So it's very, very important. So those are some of the things I've been working on. Cece mentioned the housing bill. I did work on that bill as well. I didn't work on it. I voted for it. I thought it was really important for our district, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. The last thing I do want to mention is that we are thinking of going, we expect to go into special session, which would happen probably about mid-October to the end of October. And in the special session, there are people that are working on trying to find a pathway to a housing bill that both the House and the Senate will agree on, and that the governor would sign. There are a number of other issues that are likely to come up in special session, but the most important one is probably to look at the budget in light of the federal cuts that we have faced as a state. And there are many, and there are more coming. So in working on the budget, we are already holding informational hearings to get a handle on what's going on with the federal cuts. The biggest cuts that we're likely to see are in Medicaid and in SNAP. And these programs are projected, the cuts from the federal government are projected to cost the state of Connecticut about $13 billion over the next 10 years, which is very hard for us to see how we would make up for that. Some of it is described as going after fraud, so that there will be a penalty for states when they have an application that was done in error. That's very misleading to people because it makes people think that these errors are that somebody's getting Medicaid that wasn't supposed to get it. In fact, it is much more likely that the error is checking the wrong box on a form. Once it's corrected through an audit system, then the person is entitled to that benefit. Or maybe there's a document missing, or maybe there's a signature missing on one page. Those are typically found in an audit, and those once corrected, the person is entitled. There's been very little instances where somebody received the benefits and they weren't entitled. But unfortunately, the new system will penalize us for those errors. The other way it hits Connecticut very largely is because just the cost of administration of Medicaid has historically been done 50% by the state and 50% paid for by the federal government. Although it's the state's responsibility to process claims and applications for Medicaid. In the future, that will be shifted so that 25% of the cost that the federal government used to pay is now being shifted to the states. So there are many ways in which we're going to struggle to look at how do we replace those funds. They're billed as a big tax cut from the federal government. We know most of those taxes go to super wealthy people, but there will be tax cuts for middle class people as well. But the question is, how does the state of Connecticut make up for those cuts without looking at increasing revenue? So it's really it's not clear to me that these major shifts of funding from the federal government to the state government are going to be good for Connecticut. I think ultimately we're going to struggle to find the dollars to replace those lost federal funds. And there are many other areas where that's happening as well, but the biggest one that we know of is going to be Medicaid and SNAP. So I know I spoke a little longer than I was supposed to. I'm sorry, Amy.
That's okay. I have like timer anxiety. I'm looking at my phone going, get the hook. But everything you said is so important. So
you need to go like
glad
this.
that you
talk too long.
It's good for you to put that information out there because it is foundational to almost everything that we're going to be discussing as we move through the rest of this event tonight. So without further ado, Representative Constantine, jump right in.
Thank you so much. And as everyone's sorry, we can't be to see people in person and chat up. But I actually do know there's some people on the Zoom who actually do prefer Zoom. So, it's a necessary that we can do this. Picking up on what Julie said regarding kind of work that's ongoing. I'm new, I just finished my first session and maybe getting to my first special session at the end of the month. But a lot of the things that I picked up on, as you know, I'm on energy and technology, education, and vice chair of finance. So on the finance side, which kind of went through quite a few different kind of touches on different committees too. I kind of picked up on work of past bills that have been done and kind of when we realized that fixes had to be made. First, the Office of Fiscal Analysis came to us and said, we're mandated to do the fiscal accountability report every few years, but we know we're off. And indeed, because they were always legally, the way the language was written, they were legally able to talk about non-fixed costs and project non-fixed costs for, such as in their budget, pensions and debt service, but they weren't able to project in non-fixed costs, which are really service demands and policy choices. So that cost us in fiscal year 24, we overspent our general fund by 285 million. In fiscal year 25, we overspent by 215 million. So this is something that we had to fix. And that was what the fiscal accountability report bill that we did. So now we have a better projection of what we agree in our budget this year will be accounted for next year, that it will naturally grow with inflation or service demands. The other one would be also on kind of on the DRS side, we'll stick with super finance right now, is helping DRS go after people who don't pay their taxes, tax scofflaws. There's about 300 million that's outstanding. So we clarified that they can go after them, that they can utilize the Attorney General's office to go after them because, that's our money. That's our taxpayer money. We all pay our taxes. Other people should too. And then one on the consumer side, which the resident side, which might include some of you who Connecticut residents, when we work from home, but your company and your office is only in New York City, you are taxed for New York State and New York City taxes. So we're just starting to implement kind of first stages of DRS, trying to work with New York State and mainly New York State to figure out, for the benefit of our residents, can they pay Connecticut taxes? They live here, they work here. We would like to capture their tax money. Plus, we do charge a little bit less than New York. So it's a win-win for Connecticut and Connecticut residents. And the third kind of fix that we did was on the bottle bill, both on the environmental side and then it also where the bottle deposit fees from 5 cents to 10 cents, which helps remind people that we need to recycle our bottles, that we should return them, that they shouldn't be thrown in the trash or even in recycling where they might not be recycled, but returned to the distributors. So we had to put in a limit as to how many could be returned every day, not so much for residents, but the issue that we had was since we're 10 cents, New York State is 5 cents and New Jersey 0 and Rhode Island 0. So initially we thought our bottle bill was great now that we were going to 10 cents. We went from about a 20-year average of 54% but what
Stop
was
it.
actually,
Stop it. You're breaking up quite a bit.
oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know why. Let me turn off the AC. Hold on, just in case.
And herein lies the
There's no
struggle.
background noise. I'm actually in my son's apartment, so I was in
Carry
a
on. I'm sorry.
conference. But what we were seeing is that redemption centers that were near the borders were actually getting lots of trucks coming in from out of state and depositing their bottles. This is illegal. There's a little sign and like 1-inch writing everywhere that you can't do that, but everyone was ignoring that. So we took some measures to limit bottle deposits down to like 2,400 bottles, which is 10 bags, doesn't even fit in a car. And we're working with the Attorney General's office to remind people, that they can't do this. So hopefully that will end up saving us, because they're basically stealing from our general funds. It's $13 million or so that we are paying to people who didn't even buy their bottles in Connecticut, and our distributors are also paying the price because they have to buy their bottles back even if they didn't sell them. So we're just trying to work on that. And then as Cece said, energy's out there and housing's out there. On energy, we moved in the last session, we moved $780 million over the next 3 years off public benefits. We did trim down a little bit of our renewables portfolio. We ended the EV charger subsidies, in light of the federal ones, we'll have to figure that out. And we converted mainly storm costs to securitization. That's $226 million that we took off the public benefits too. And these are things that I think we all need to start taking a long-term view of what energy is going to cost us in the future. We know nationally energy costs are going up. They went up 5%. They will be going up now with a lot of the wind and solar being cut. The fact that climate changes, require that our facilities have more climate resiliency work done around them. I just visited two substations a few weeks ago, and some of them are right on the river. They were, or the Long Island Sound. They were built a long time ago. So, the depths of the pilings they had to do, the gates that they've had to do to seal off is tremendous. And on the substations, the other substation that was there, it was built 20 years ago at $125 million. It's all steel. If we need to expand more on energy, this will cost 3 times more today to build than it used to. So as legislators, we need to figure out how do we take that cost burden off the consumers, and what can we do on the legislative side to pay for both resiliency and expansion, so the bill doesn't end up with you. And then I've also been looking into housing because rumor has it that we might be looking at a housing bill in October or at some point. So I've been attending the conference on housing up here, really focusing on, it's in New Haven for the next, actually it ends tomorrow, but really focusing on, and I've been going to sessions that look on how do other states finance their public housing? How do they help build housing? How does transportation play into housing? And how do we plan out transportation to connect people in other parts of the states to jobs here, and make sure employers have people who can get to work, who can live close to work, or actually travel to work, either on public transport or get to work fast. So I will end it there. I went over 5 minutes, sorry.
All right, I am going to tap into my old New Yorker self from where I was born and raised. I'm going to speak really quickly so I can get to the end of mine as fast as I possibly can. No, everything that you guys have all hit on is really important stuff. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about what some of my goals were going in, what I accomplished, and then we'll move right into some questions. A number of questions are coming in. Just make sure you use that space to submit any questions you may have so that we can keep going throughout the next about an hour. Anyway, so we did all have collectively some very big goals. I know that personally I was eager to see us expand childcare. So thank you for working on that, Cece. Also looking to improve special ed funding. We've got, there's some improvement there. Lower energy bills. We're chipping away at it. But I also was looking to strengthen the green economy and looking at ways for more climate resiliency in the face of the floods that we had a year ago and the damage that they did to our state in very concentrated ways. And we know that more of that is coming. So these were things that I was really focused on and wanted to be able to do outside of my own committee work. We did what we could on these within the fiscal constraints that we had to work with. I'm on the finance committee, as I think it was Senator Kushner said, we're each on one or the other of the money committees, if not more than one. And understanding that we had to face the unknown that was coming from the federal government, because as Senator Kushner also referenced, we are each about to start some have had already and some will be having informational hearings about how these federal cuts are going to affect specific sectors of the work that we do. So we had the unknown coming from the federal government, and then we have our own fiscal guardrails here that limited how we could spend the money, and it also made us really limited with the initial numbers that we have. There's another issue at play here, and that is the budgetary process and how we don't know what we really truly have in the bank until after we pass the budget, which I believe to be problematic. I see some nodding in the group, and I think that there may be some possibly, I won't speak for my crew here, I'll let them weigh in on that, but we had a $1.3 billion surplus after we had passed legislation. What will we do with that? I mean, we are a very, very big legislature for such a small state. And so we're going to have a lot of opinions, I think, about how that would best be utilized, whether it continues to pay pensions or whether we boost what we were going to spend on childcare and that kind of thing. Or energy, paying down more energy, all of the things that are important to those of you who live in our communities and to everybody else throughout the rest of the state. Just jumping in really fast to what some of my priorities were as the transportation chair, we really focused on road safety, so worker safety, pedestrian safety, biker safety. We enhanced safety measures for highway workers, including having required training, mandatory driver training for new drivers. So when you have your permit, you're now going to understand worker roadside safety. We have had some really tragic fatalities on our roads in very recent years. And then we also linked DWIs to boating while intoxicated. This was very important to a member of our family. In fact, Senator Kushner's aide, who many of you have worked with, a wonderful young woman. She lost her partner in a boating accident, and the driver of the boat had multiple DUIs. And so we worked to tie that together, and that was a bipartisan effort and was something that we got finished in record time, given when the idea was presented to us during session and when we were able to finish that. And that was really important to so many of us. And I know that we got a lot of support from police departments on that, but mostly we got support from the families who have suffered such horrible pain because of that loss. And then another thing that we did that was a direct response to what police chiefs were asking for is we reclassified e-bikes. I don't know if you guys have seen these e-bikes that are just cruising down our roads. Some of them, you look at them and you go, wait, what just went by? Was that a motorcycle? And starting October 1st, we're going to have new classifications that will require driver's licenses for some, requires helmets for all kinds of things. And it makes it easier for our police departments to understand what the difference between each of those bikes. So on shifting to finance, I am on the finance committee, but I'm also the transportation bonding subcommittee chair, co-chair. And the primary thing that we did was we increased TAR funding. That's town aid road grants. That hadn't seen a funding increase since 2014. And we went from 60 million a year to 80 million a year. So over the 2 years that we committed an extra 40 million to roads, which is really important at this point. It's something that each of our communities asks for. The amount that Ridgefield gets, it's all allocated by formula, but this will significantly increase the amount that that each town sees. So we were excited about that. I'm also on public health. We did do a lot. Oh, I swear the House chair of public health, I thought she was on the floor all day, every day. So there was so much that was passed, but a lot of it is going back and fixing a lot of language that we needed to go back and correct, updating statutes, things like that. I think the most important piece to me was that we prohibited individual healthcare providers from denying care based on their individual beliefs. So if somebody comes into your space, you must be treated, particularly if it's an emergency, and that's something that was very important. A lot of the rest of my work has been on outside of my committees, domestic violence and sexual assault. It's something that is important to me. We haven't gotten enough passed in that space, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work on that. So with that said, we do have some questions that have come in. I'm going to hit them in the order that they have been sent to me. Some of them will be directed to specific legislators based on where they serve in terms of their committee work. Some are directed to all of us. So it looks like we have our first question probably going to hit Senator Marr a little more than the rest of us. What actions has our district taken? Now, this is really meant to be directed toward Board of Ed members, but to the best that we can from the state level, we can answer these. What actions has our district taken to add further protection for our kids in school in light of all the school shootings? And there was another question that came in after that is related. Has the card around the necklace emergency system been approved for Ridgefield as well? Senator
Okay,
Mark, can you speak to some of that?
absolutely. So the bill session ended on the 4th of June, and the governor signed the emergency response card that I mentioned into law on the 24th of June. So what that means now is it is a Public Act 25-102. And that means that the school systems and their Board of Ed, working with their superintendents, can make a decision whether or not to apply for a grant from the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. And there is about $20 million of bonded money in that fund for this particular bill across all types of protection for schools, not just the card. And once the school makes that decision, along with their superintendent, to request the funding for that, then the grant and the Board of Ed, of course, the grant will have to be written, request will have to be written, and then they can potentially get funding. As whether or not Ridgefield has applied for it yet, I do not know, but I do know that Westport is talking about doing it because the superintendent of schools in Westport had instituted something similar in his previous school system in Connecticut and was really pleased with having it in place. So I don't know if Ridgefield has done it, and I don't know if they're planning to, but they certainly can access it through that number, Public Act 25-102.
Thank you for that. And I think it's important for everybody now. We can all emphasize how important it is to vote in the municipal elections coming up this November. You have some really strong candidates who are really passionate about these things, and these are questions that they're going to want to answer, and you're certainly going to want to know where they stand on this. So I would encourage everyone to reach out to those who are running for those Board of Ed seats in particular on these issues. I have a question up here. Looks like it's directed toward you, Senator Kushner. Will the Striking Workers Act be taken up again next session?
Well, I think it's very likely we will take it up again. It's hard to predict whether it'll be next session or a future session. I know I was quoted after the governor vetoed the bill that I thought someday it would pass, whether it might have to wait until we have a different governor. I don't think he liked that comment too much, but clearly, we don't see eye to eye on this issue. To me, it's an issue of if we give workers under federal law the right to strike, really the only way they can exercise that right is if they're clear that they can put food on their table for their kids and for their families. And that's something that's very important. And we know that middle class families have benefited so much from collective bargaining, and so much of what we know in terms of healthcare and in terms of retirement benefits are really very, very precious to people. And those are the main reasons people end up out on strike when when the employer is trying to change the healthcare or cut the healthcare so that you can't afford it anymore. So for me, it's a real priority. It's an issue of humaneness where we want to make sure that people aren't starved out when they are exercising their federal rights. So I do suspect we'll see it again. But a lot of this depends on the advocates as well, the people being there and standing up for these things. And so it's an issue I will take up with the activists that are, pushing for that legislation. But I personally would like to see it come up again. I do want to add something about the school safety, though, if we can go back to that for a moment. Again, I mentioned the Center for School Safety, and I would hope that people from our district will take advantage of those funds. I think, of those resources, because I think there's always been a concern about the safeness of our schools. But, obviously that's heightened as we've seen recent events. And I think it's a really good, they have very good people there, professional people that are able to do research, be able to help with preparing the plan. So I know that the Ridgefield Public Schools has had some interaction when there's been a crisis, but there are other resources there as well. And I hope that people will make use of that.
Thank you. I appreciate the addition to the conversation on the program that you talk about is such a good one, and it's so important that another space that I really think our municipal candidates should be exploring as well. Okay, so I have a question for all of us. If we could each try and keep it kind of succinct, that would be, and this is coming from me, who said she was going to go quickly and didn't. Polarization is dividing citizen from citizen and elected representative from their colleagues across the aisle. What, if anything, are each of you doing to address this? If I may, I'm just going to jump in really quickly with my super easy answer, and that is I'm very fortunate to work as the chair of a committee that is, in its nature, a very bipartisan endeavor. With that said, this year I found that votes were even more party line than they had ever been. And with that, that means that there were more votes against things that we had discussed as a group and things that we had talked about in a bipartisan manner. And then I was surprised by many of the votes outside of that coming out of committee. Because we had the majority, we still passed them out of committee. But for me, the goal in order to get those important, like I said, we worked so much on road worker safety. I mean, who doesn't want to keep people safe working on the sides of our roads? Who doesn't want to keep pedestrians and kids on bikes safe? So I spent a lot of my time in the hours leading up to any of my bills being called on the other side of the aisle, asking questions, talking to them about what it is that their concerns were, debunking some of the misinformation. I'm sorry, I'm tired of using misinformation. Some of the lies that they had been told by people who opposed some of the legislation. And in doing so, I ended up passing every single bill that I passed was passed in a bipartisan manner. And I know that was because of the effort that I made to go across the aisle and correct misinformation, but also to just ask, what are you concerned about? Because sometimes there is just this tendency to just vote with your party without thinking about what the actual elements of the bill are. And I think right now, folks are being asked on that side of the aisle to be anti-Democrat as much as they possibly can. Being very frank, this is what was told to me by some of my colleagues across the aisle. And it's just important that we understand their fears and talk to them like they're human beings. As long as they're talking to me like I'm a human being, that's not a problem. And then be able to be immersed enough in your legislative details that you can answer the questions honestly. And that really is the key to being able to get things to be a little bit more bipartisan, is just be honest and be open and be willing to have really difficult conversations. That's my piece. You guys jump right in.
Okay, I'll go next. I think it is really important that we not use rhetoric. That, to Amy's point, we look at people as people and not from a ideology, but rather as people who are trying to represent their district. And to that end, what my co-chair in the Children's Committee and I are doing is, in November, before our session starts at the beginning of February, and in November, we're going to sit down with the chairs, the ranking members from the Children's Committee, and sit down with them and talk about what their priorities are this session and come to an agreement about how to move forward for the committee. And that is talking in front of the issues before we get to that point where we are polarized, and making an effort to work together. So toning down the rhetoric and reaching across the aisle and having conversations. And one of the things that I was able to do this summer that really was great was having conversations with the Senate Minority Leader, about nominations for the advisory committee and building relationships. Everything in the world is all about the relationships you have. And how do we make sure that we are breaking down barriers by building the connections? And that's what I will work on.
I'd like to jump in and maybe take it in a little bit of a different direction. I do work on a committee that is the Labor Committee is very partisan, and there isn't much collaboration. Usually if you're on the Education Committee or the Children's Committee or the Public Health Committee, people might have different approaches to these issues, but people are there because they want to work to protect public health. Or in the Labor Committee, it tends to be, the Democrats are people who support workers and working families, and many of the people, I would say most of the people that are assigned to that committee from the Republican caucuses tend to be very anti-union. And so that's sort of the starting point for us. But I'd rather take it in a different direction, because I think a lot of the question really comes to like what's going on in our country, that there's this huge political divide, and the rhetoric is very intense. I think social media has really heightened that. If you look at my Facebook page, which I hope you all do, there's tons of comments there on my posts that are totally inappropriate. Name calling, posting memes that have nothing to do with the topic. Some of my colleagues have actually chosen to turn off the comments. We're not allowed to block people because it's a public forum. But some of my colleagues have turned off the comments, and I haven't made up my mind completely. I feel like people should be able to comment, but at the same time, I hate seeing people subjected to that tone of rhetoric and the name calling in particular. I think that what's happening right now in our country is extremely dangerous. People are forming opinions on very little information or facts, and a lot of it is just feeding people's fears. And particularly living in Danbury, I see that very much on the issue of ICE and the deportation of immigrants in our community. And some folks might say, well, this doesn't really affect Ridgefield, but I think it does. I think it affects all of us, because the way ICE is operating right now, to me, is very anti-democratic, and it is something we should all be concerned about. When you see masked agents wearing full camo, we had about 30 ICE agents in our courthouse parking lot, full gear, weapons out, camo, wearing camo, and they've got people believing that this is to arrest criminals. But in fact, I know from the people inside the courthouse, they felt terrorized. People working in the courthouse felt terrorized by the ICE agents. There was no process by which they had to identify themselves even to get into the building, and they were carrying weapons, and it felt very scary to people inside the building. One of the two people that was deported or detained that day was someone who had failed to register their car, and in fact had registered their car, and they were going to have their case dismissed. And so what's going on with ICE, I think, is extremely dangerous. I would like to see in special session a bill put forward to say that no law enforcement, whether you're ICE or FBI, no law enforcement is allowed to wear masks or to cover their license plates. Now, some people have pushed back on me a little and said, well, they're doing this to protect their families, because if they're identified, someone could go after their families. And the reality is that our law enforcement in our state, our police, they face just as many dangerous situations. I would say far more dangerous situations, and they're not allowed to mask themselves. They have to identify themselves. So I think this is something that's very important, and I think we also need to really take care of how our courthouses are protected so that people can come in and, regardless of their immigration status, can report crimes, can testify in hearings where there has been a crime committed, and that there shouldn't be this kind of terror going on. And from the people I know in my community, this is very terrorizing. So I hope people in Ridgefield will also stand up against what I see as a real a test of our democracy if we're going to allow those kinds of activities. And so that's my appeal to you, and how I feel like it's being used so much to vilify people. Immigrants built our country. We all have immigrants in our backgrounds, and immigration was always seen as something really positive, people coming to the United States to fulfill the American dream. And we all get this, but that's changed. And now the rhetoric is that immigrants are here illegally, they're taking advantage of our system. And people have lost sight of how the people who I know that are here and trying to get legal citizenship, they're folks that want to have a better life, just like my grandparents did. And just like I've been the beneficiary of immigrants to our country. So, I feel very passionate about it. I'm sorry, I took more than 5 minutes, but it's a big topic today.
Anybody else want to say anything before we move on to the next question? I know we're pressed for time here. Sav, do you want to?
Amy, my Wi-Fi dropped off. Is this the same question about civility?
Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, listen, everyone said everything, but I follow what I tell other people. After COVID, definitely the last 10 years, we've all kind of like gone into our shell. We're on our phones. We're kind of a little siloed, especially during COVID. We need to get back out there. We need to talk with our neighbors. We need to talk with our friends, and just have a reset. And we need to remember how to speak to people civilly. Everyone online, the way they write compared to, I read things and I'm like, I know this person, they would never say this in person. And sometimes things just don't come across the same, on social media versus verbally. So I encourage people to talk to their neighbors, get their ideas, exchange thoughts in a civil, polite manner like we used to. And, a lot of this job is about talking and speaking with other people and figuring out what they think about a bill or what their ideas are to make it a bill better. And it's really keeping up those communication lines with everybody so we can remember that, we're all on the same team. We all want to move forward. We all want to make things better for our state, for our residents. So.
Thanks, Sav. So really quick one that I know I can just give a quick answer to. Whatever happened to digital driver's licenses? We committed to that in Connecticut back in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, and nothing has moved forward. That is not a legislative decision. That is an administrative one. And I actually have that on my list of things to poke both the governor's office and DAS about this upcoming session to find out, especially given the shift to real IDs and how other states are allowing that to be used. I would like to see us at the forefront. With that said, we do have a number of really antiquated systems in play across multiple agencies, not the least of which who struggling to talk to one another and all of that are um, the DMV and DEEP, which both one handles driver's licenses, one handles voting licenses, things like that. So being able to connect everything technologically when we have a seriously outdated system across most agencies is probably the biggest struggle, but that's what I'm expecting to find out, and we'll definitely let y'all know after we have more information in the upcoming session. Okay, so the next question I have is, pardon me, what are we doing to eliminate the special benefit charge from our Eversource bill? We are on solar, so we get a delivery connection charge, only which was 2/3 of our bill. The special benefit charge was the other third. So anybody on energy and technology want to talk a little bit about some of the process, and then we can all, I mean, we all understand, I think, what's going on. I just didn't want to take anybody's thunder.
Cece, do you want to take this first, or I can?
Why don't you go and then I'll add in as needed.
Oh, perfect. So yeah, listen, we made a first step this year. Obviously, the public benefits line, it has always been on our bill. It used to be 3, then they separated out a few years ago. And where we all noticed it was when our July bills came with that extraordinary 10-month cost, which the chair up here tried to fight to bring it over 3 years. She was overruled, so it had to go down to 10 months. That's since over. But it has focused our attention on what the public benefits charge is. And a good portion of it is the cost of nuclear power, which does fluctuate over time. And I think it has gone down to the other part of public benefits made us look at, wait a minute, we have over 60 plus energy programs in here. They all cost money to run, but which ones are most effective and which ones should be using and which ones were great when they started and might be unnecessary now. And that's, those are one of them that we took off. We took off the EV charger for homes, the subsidy, for $50 million. When EVs first came, it was a way to encourage people to help buy their EVs and get into that technology. Right now, we're at the point where EVs are widely used. People know the value of EVs, just the pollution factor, the fact that, it's electric, so it's not going to be polluting from your car. And it's very, very quiet. And, some people just really love the technology of new EVs. So we moved some of that stuff. We're reevaluating some of the other programs. And then the other part is, like I mentioned before, is what are we going to do for converting storm costs? We've had a few big storms. We have moved some of those to securitization. And I think as a legislature, we need to look at how are we going to prepare for bigger storms that, have been coming more frequently because we can't put this in public benefits. So what can we do as a legislature, to help pay for these costs and help set aside money so the consumers don't pay the brunt of this?
I thought you did a great job. Nothing to add there. Although I will add that we know that Revolution Wind, which is being built out of the new London Pier, that is 80% complete. And when it's 100% complete, which was scheduled for next year, it will power over 350,000 homes with electricity. We know that there were thousands of jobs working on this installation. and it was closed down in the past several weeks by the federal administration. I think if people are concerned about their public benefit charges, people are concerned about the impact on electricity needs from data centers and AI, that we all need to be sharing that information with the federal government, that we believe that Revolution Wind must be restarted, and that solar arrays are just one in the toolbox of how we are going to meet our energy needs. So Savette mentioned nuclear. So it's nuclear, solar, wind, geothermal, hydropower from Quebec, water that comes down. There are so many different ways that we need to be looking at the renewables, and they can't be just one solution. And I know that the federal government has talked about clean coal, and to the best of my knowledge, coal has never been clean. And the coal industry recognizes this and has been a declining industry over time. My husband used to be in commodities and moved coal, and so I learned a great deal about that when he was doing that work. Coal is not clean. We need a wide array of renewables because the energy needs are only going to grow over time. And your voice is incredibly important in this effort to make sure that we move us back into funding things like Revolution Wind and solar arrays.
Thank you for bringing that up, because actually the next question that I was going to bring into the conversation was specifically, do Democrat legislators have a plan to resist the federal government's obstruction of the Revolution Wind project? Plan in place, not officially per se, but I do know, I just saw the governor speak yesterday. I saw him speak last week. We are all talking about it, and the indicators are there that we're going to be collectively resisting this and doing whatever that could look like. And we're taking ideas. So if you have a good one, you let us know.
Amy, if I could just jump in
Yeah.
here. The governor also immediately reached out to the federal government. He had been given the promise is too strong a word. He'd been told that Revolution Wind was going to continue, and then it was pulled. So he has immediately gone back to the federal government. The governor is working on it as well. So I don't want to say that it's just on legislators. It is also work that I know his office is doing.
Correct. Staying on environment, also from the same resident, I am horrified by the proliferation of single-use plastic. I feel that consumers have been lied to by the plastics industry about the viability of plastic recycling as it currently exists. Do you have ideas and/or plans about working on this problem and holding the producers of these products accountable for their part in this environmental disaster? First off, is anybody on the Environment Committee that wants to speak to it? If not, I know we all have feelings.
I don't think any of us are on the Environment Committee. I used to be on the Environment Committee. Oh, are you, Cece? Well, can I just start for a moment? Because in 2019, it was my first term in the legislature, and I was so excited that we passed legislation that banned single-use plastic bags, and that was a really big deal. And people said it was going to be horrible, that we wouldn't be able to live without our plastic bags. And in fact, that transition was made, I would say, relatively smoothly, and that people are really using renewal, bags that can be used over and over again. And I know myself, I have really changed my habits. And I thought that, but I found even in the next term I was in, it became harder and harder to pass legislation to keep moving in that direction of restricting the use of plastics. And I feel that's very unfortunate. I no longer serve on that committee, but I agree that we really need to get back to that and really look at ways that we can keep adding to restrictions on the use of plastic. It is a serious problem. And as we all know, this idea that the recycling is in crisis as well. even recycling isn't really being done here in the state the way it should be. And we're finding fewer outlets for the recycled goods. And so we have a lot of challenges on that, and I hope that we'll get back to it.
Thanks, Julie. I have seen there are multiple comments in here, not questions, talking about support for the unmasking of ICE. And to be on the record with that, I am completely in agreement and am hopeful that that is something that we're discussing when we are in, not discussing, something that we're voting on when we're in special session. I'm pushing to have that happen as well. I don't know where you guys are, if you want to talk a little bit about it. The other two who have not, I see heads nodding.
I'm happy to say 100%. And I believe that I signed, and I think Julie also signed a letter to our federal government requesting that we unmask ICE. And I believe we both also signed a letter to our Supreme Court Justice here in Connecticut requesting that the courts are safe for everyone to attend and do their legal business and not be a mousetrap for ICE. So that is something that I know that we share.
Go ahead,
I'm sorry, I'm unmuted. I just want to say, going back to the plastics, one of the ways that we are looking at an environment of handling all of these plastics that cannot be recycled, and that literally was just a marketing scheme from the oil industry, is looking at packaging, going upstream and looking at packaging to reduce the amount of plastics being used in packaging. Certainly in the Amazon culture that we live in, making sure, and we're seeing that Amazon is doing that with cardboard boxes, moving into bags, recyclable paper. But we want to go even further upstream to make sure that the packages that are being delivered to us are not shrink wrapped and placed in with all of this extra plastics around it that just keep contributing if you multiply them out by the number of units. So that's some of the work that we're doing in environment.
And two really good topics. The whole ICE question or discussion goes back to our previous discussion regarding speaking with people, civility, social media. I know I see what's written on, online, a lot of vehemence on, for the masking or just pleasure in what's happening to people. But I don't think I've come across anyone anywhere in town, whatever party they are, that are not horrified and concerned about how this is being done, the lack of due process, the fact that, yes, we should go after criminals, but, these aren't criminals. When people show up for their immigration court hearings, we know the green cards and the immigration papers, the system has been so understaffed. We know people 5 years, 8 years, 10 years that have been going through the process, and they show up to the courthouse to continue their process, and then they're arrested. These aren't the criminals these aren't criminals. And everyone I've spoken to are just very, very concerned. So, this is something that, we should address. I would just hope that ICE would act in a manner befitting our law enforcement. But these are the orders that they're under. So, we'll just have to, hear from you too, and, what your suggestions are before we go into session. And then on the plastics, listen, we need to work with manufacturers. There isn't a recycling market per se. I'm going to be going up to the recycling center in Shelton. I'll be touring that. It's a single stream recycling. Personally, I'm not a fan of single stream recycling. I don't know. I'm very familiar with the Wilton transfer station. I don't know if anybody else is, but when you go there and you dump everything in one pot in your glass, in the big tank, the big, I guess, shipping container, everything just gets mixed. And I just don't see how much of that's been recycled. Years ago, the New York Times did an article on, there's 3 or 4 items that are the bulk of recycling, and recycling that can actually make a difference, whether it's glass, newspaper, cardboard, and metal cans. And, I think we should really think about reduction on our side and how do we recycle that. But we need to bring in the manufacturers. In Europe, they've already brought in the manufacturers of bottles. Bottle caps aren't, when you twist them off, they're still attached to the bottle, because we know that bottle caps they jam up the machines at the recycling centers. And this way they stay on the bottles, so they kind of go in as one unit. I think we need to be talking with manufacturers, because without their help, consumers, we've gone into this habit of eating on the go or using all the plastic. So, we all need to change our own habits, but we need the help of manufacturers too, to make sure that we can reduce how much garbage is going into landfills or incinerators, because we know it's not all getting recycled.
Thanks, Sabat. So there's a question here about toning down the rhetoric, getting back to that. And I think it's an important question because we were also asked very specifically, was there an incident that caused us to move this to this online format? And I will answer that very, very briefly because I don't want to waste a lot of time. And it's quite simply, given the heated rhetoric around violence and the call for violence from the president against Democrats at the end of the week, as well as from many other very vocal right-wing outlets, news outlets. We were told that it would be best if we could to try and have a police presence at our event. We reached out. I reached out directly to the chief of police, who responded immediately, and he said he would post it, looking for someone who could take the overtime to do so. Also, Brenda from the library had requested this as well. And unfortunately, by the end of the day on Friday, no one had picked up that spot yet. And because we wouldn't have been able to move this to an online format in a single day, we wouldn't have been able to get the information out. We were afraid you guys would miss that this was being, we had to make a quick decision Friday afternoon. And so we did. I have heard some people quote to me that they heard that the police department had refused to have someone present, and that is absolutely, categorically, fully, and completely untrue. We just didn't have anybody signed up when we had to make the decision. That's it. That's all there is to it. So getting to this question, how can each side tone down the rhetoric when the chair of the Connecticut Republican Party, Ben Proto, was seen yesterday at an event where the Confederate flag was displayed? And I think that we're all going to have a passionate answer about this. My point of view here is it's impossible to talk about this without talking about what happened to Charlie Kirk. And I will say very cleanly that I am opposed to all gun violence, period, end of story, full stop. I don't care what your opinion is. I don't believe in the death penalty, and I don't believe in vigilante death for something like that. I do think it is very important to clarify that what was shared by Charlie Kirk, the information, or the lack of information, but the points of view, these are not political opinions. These are not differences in political opinions. A difference in political opinion is, how are we going to pay for the benefits charge on an energy bill, or how are we going to support workers who are on strike, things like that. Those are political opinions. Misogyny is not a political opinion. Racism is not a political opinion. And anti-LGBTQ and trans speak. This is hate speech, not political opinions. Do I think that he deserved to die for that? Absolutely not. No one does. Again, I am anti-death penalty. So there's no congruous connection there if I were okay with this and not okay with that. I will always be anti gun violence, anti school shooting, which is what this was. And I am I think it's really important to be very honest about where the rhetoric is coming from. We're angry about being told that we are the violent radical left. we're really mad about that because we're the ones here fighting to ensure that our schools are safe, our kids are safe, our streets are safe. Everybody has some shot at something equitable, and everybody is treated with respect. And Charlie Kirk did not do that. Did he deserve to die? No, but that's not political opinion. That's hate speech. I'm going to jump back and let somebody else speak.
Well, I'll jump in here. The question specifically about the chairman of the Republican Party being at an event where there was a backdrop of it wasn't a backdrop, but there was a hanging of the Confederate flag. And I find that very, very disturbing, especially in light of the fact that there had been a joint statement by both the chair of the Democratic Party here in Connecticut, my own mayor, Roberto Alves, and the chair of the Republican Party, saying we need to tone down the rhetoric and saying that, their opposition to violence in response to the shooting. It's then very upsetting to see the chairman go out to an event with that kind of flag hanging. And we can't forget that it stands for something. People who are hanging the Confederate flag are saying, we think that the country got this wrong and that the Confederates should have won. And it was based so much on slavery and on racism. And it is a symbol of racism in our country. It's been used that way for decades and decades and for more than a century. And so for me, I think that if I would have hoped that he would have gone in there and said, hey, this isn't a good setting because of the flag. But it's also just really astonishing to me that here in Connecticut, I think we sometimes forget that there are people who display those symbols of racism so openly. We don't expect to see that in Connecticut. And I think it's disgraceful.
So anyone who knows what my background is knows that I worked at Sandy Hook Promise in Newtown with the two parents who lost their little boys at the Sandy Hook tragedy. I have always advocated for preventing gun violence. I will always advocate for preventing gun violence. I also am against the death penalty, and I am against anyone being shot, no matter what they say. That is not our country. So how do we tone down the rhetoric? I go back to what I said earlier. We build relationships across the aisle. We talk to each other. We hear what other people have to say. We listen to them, and hopefully they will listen to us. And we start to build bridges again because we have stopped listening to each other. And that is only exacerbating the situation. Do I think that the statement that was put out by the heads of the two parties in Connecticut was good? It was. I quoted it in my newsletter on Friday. I'm disappointed that it only lasts long enough for a statement and doesn't carry on, because I think we all need to be talking to each other, not just once, but continuously.
I mean, very well said, Cece. What happened to Charlie Kirk was horrifying. What happened to Melissa Hortman and her husband was horrifying. And a lot of people seem to be siloed. They only hear, about some things and not others. And that's where we get back to where we do need to speak with each other and and commiserate and agree how terrible murder is, how terrible gun violence is, and what can we do about it? What can we do to address these root causes? So I think we have a lot of work to do in front of us. This is the first I heard about the Connecticut Republican Party chair. Sometimes I think we've regressed after making so much progression. This isn't the United States that I knew growing up in the 70s in Minnesota in the 80s. Daughter of immigrants, everyone was welcoming, and we all had shared experiences and a shared education. So I think we all have a lot of work to do. But I think we should all be able to agree on how terrible murder is and, and divisive symbols,
Thanks, Savit. So we are now at the 7:19 mark, and the next question is one that will likely take the rest of our time. This comment says, thanks to Rep. Berger-Dravallo and Rep. Constantine for voting against 5002. For those of you who do not know, that was the housing bill last session. Can we count on you and Senators Marr and Kushner to vote no if it is brought back with few or no changes? First of all, I just want to be very clear about why I voted no. I have, on one level, an easier task when it comes to things like this than everybody else on this panel because I represent one single town. I do not have to balance distinctly different towns. So for me to listen to what was recommended to me by our democratically run Planning and Zoning Committee and our first select persons, in this circumstance, I felt that the concerns were enough for me to vote no. However, one thing that I think we need to really understand thoroughly is I have never voted no on something that is just because the concept is something that is not palatable to some of the more vocal members of our community. So can we count on you to vote no if it's brought back with few or no changes? I will commit to nothing ever on any bill until I have read every word of the language of that bill. At that point, if I have concerns, if Planning and Zoning or Rudy Marconi or anybody has concerns about that they want to share with me, they will. They are a direct conduit to us, which is why it is so important. Once again, getting back to municipal elections, elect the people who you know represent you so that they can effectively communicate to us what their concerns are when it comes to things like this. And then we can vote accordingly or have conversations about changing bill language or whatever that is. So with that said, I will just say, no, I cannot commit to anything because I haven't seen any bill language and I will never commit to something until I've read it. But thanks for the question. Who's next?
Okay, I'll go next. I have had this conversation as I mentioned earlier, I represent a lot of towns, 8 towns. And I've had this conversation in Westport, and I've had this conversation in New Canaan, and I'm also in Wilton. And now I'm having it in Ridgefield. I looked at this bill, read the bill, and really struggled with it. I really struggled with signing the bill. There was one particular thing that I thought was particularly difficult for the towns that I represent, and that is the parking requirement of under, I believe it was 24 units, no parking lots, no parking was required. But I also knew that particular element of the bill was not coming into play, if it were signed into law, was not going to be instituted until later and after the next session. So when the governor was thinking about vetoing the bill, I went and spoke with him, and I said to him, I'd very much like to work with you on this parking issue. I'm very concerned about it for my towns. And I hope you will not veto this bill and that we can work together going forward to make sure that we change this component. I do know that parking component is being discussed now. So for the bill that they've been working on. But I want to talk about why I ultimately voted for the bill. This Connecticut Business and Industry Association, which is CBIA, which is not a left-leaning organization in any way, shape, or form. It is very much a business-focused industry association. And they came out and said that the number one issue for Connecticut's growth is housing. We cannot bring in businesses. We cannot have workforce come into Connecticut. There is nowhere for them to live. So given that, and given the fact that I know so many people talk about their taxes in Connecticut, and they talk about Connecticut being one of the most expensive states. We cannot reduce your taxes. We cannot reduce the impact on our residents if we do not grow our state, if we do not bring in businesses. And what we need to do to bring in businesses is build houses. So that is houses of every shape and form. Okay, whether that's an ADU for people like me downsizing, whether that is an apartment building, whether that is duplexes. We need to build housing for all people because we have a life cycle within housing where you have apartments and you have young people move in and then they get married and then maybe they have a child and then they start looking for housing. And then you have people like me who've already raised all my children and I'm looking for a place to downsize. None of us can move in that cycle right now because the housing doesn't exist. So looking at CBIA, looking at the life cycle and wanting people to stay here after college and to come here and grow their families and have businesses grow, I voted for the bill with the caveat that I would work to change a couple of the things that I felt were not good for my district. But ultimately, I was looking at our district and I was looking at my district and looking at our state and trying to do the thing that would best move our state forward and would have the greatest impact, not just on all of the things I mentioned, but also on our current residents and their taxes and the impact of living in Connecticut. So thank you.
Thanks, Stacey. We have just a few minutes left. So if Julie and Sabat, if you want to do your thing.
Well, why don't I follow up with Cece? I too voted for that bill, and I'm likely to vote for it again, even if there are a few changes in that bill. I feel like housing, Cece said a lot of what, I don't want to repeat all of it, but I do feel like it's one of the biggest issues. And while I represent three municipalities, and Danbury being the largest of the three, and clearly housing is a huge issue in Danbury. I think it's a huge issue also in New Fairfield, and I think it's a huge issue in Ridgefield. Cece mentioned downsizing, but I've also heard from constituents who live in Ridgefield who might be going through a divorce or have become widowed or seniors. I think the downsizing seniors issue is really clear, but people want to stay in Ridgefield, but often cannot find housing that meets their needs. Young people who grew up in Ridgefield and want to stay there, but find they can't find a place to live that's affordable. I do think we need to focus on this issue. I feel very strongly about it. A report recently came out from the United Way, which is called the Alice Report, and it's analyzing households that are asset limited, income constrained, but employed. So people who have jobs, who in many cases are working 2 and 3 jobs. I know I posted this on my Facebook page and somebody said, well, maybe they should get a second job like I did when I was young. Well, many of these folks are working 2 and 3 jobs. But if you're working at minimum wage now, you are not able to, it's not affordable for Connecticut, or I would say probably anywhere in the United States, it's not affordable. And we have in our district 49% of our households in the district. That includes New Fairfield, that includes Ridgefield, not just Danbury, are facing these challenges of making ends meet. And I think housing is probably one of the biggest factors, most costly factors that is really forcing people into this very stress-induced, very stressful situation where they can't pay their bills. And so I feel very strongly that we need to address housing. And I feel like this bill was a bill that was worked on by both the House and the Senate and the governor's office. I think that it was a good bill. And while there may have been some issues with things like parking, even the parking issues, I think we could resolve. And so I can't guarantee, I'm very unlikely to vote no on the bill in the future.
Thanks, Julie. Sabat, you want to close it out? We have about 1 minute left.
Okay. Listen, I'm looking forward to seeing what the new bill is. I know people have been working on it. I know they took I voted no. I know they took a lot of people's considerations as to why they voted no, into consideration as they're moving forward. The main one for me, like Cece, was parking. That was the main overriding issue. There were a few others, we can talk fair share. And then I wasn't quite And then, we can talk sewer, we can talk transportation, all this stuff has to be worked together. Um, there's certain things we know we need. We know some P and Zs have kind of fallen behind on their zoning. I don't know if there's going to be something in there to help P and Zs, like kind of give them templates of here are towns similar to yours. Do you want to look at their templates as to how they're creating housing? Because, businesses are telling us they need housing for workers in order to bring businesses here. Families are telling us, there's no place for their kids to move back to. As everyone said, there's no place for seniors to downsize, or kids to start off at. So, we need to address housing. So I hope we get a bill. I hope we have a robust discussion, and hopefully we can get something done.
Thanks, Avit. I just want to close by saying I just kind of did a quick scan of the questions. I believe we got to all of the meaty stuff. The highest number of questions seem to be about gun safety in schools. And so I just wanted to alert you to grassroots efforts are the thing that gets these things done at the local level. And then that brings it, I mean, all of us were activists and advocates before we got to our legislative roles. There is a group in Ridgefield called Ridgefield Residents for Safer Schools. It's a Facebook group. You might want to try and find them and see how they're organizing to meet with the Board of Ed and with the superintendent. So that's something that might be helpful for all of you who are concerned about that. And that's kind of the end of the trail. Yes, that's it for the questions, at least that we can hit. We really appreciate all of your time, all of you shifting to this online format quickly. And we had a lot. I don't know how many we ultimately ended up with, but I know that early this afternoon there were over 70 people who had registered. I believe that number climbed throughout the day. We will each have a link to the complete piece, the complete conversation that we'll be able to share once that has been processed, probably during the day tomorrow. It just takes a recording conversion and all of that to be able to put it up on social media. So once that is done, we'll each have a copy of that and we'll each share that. That'll be certainly on my legislative webpage. I would imagine that probably everybody else will do something similar. But always reach out. We are all available and accessible and want to help you in any way that we can. Even if you think it's not a state-related question, ask us and we will either direct you to the appropriate place in municipal government or in federal. So we're here sort of sitting in the middle of that. So anyway, thank you all. And to my fellow delegation members, I couldn't be any luckier than to work with the three of you. It is genuinely the greatest pleasure. So everyone have a wonderful night and thank you so much. Oh, and thank you to Max and Ted who did all of the scrambling to get all of this done at the last minute and who have been monitoring all the questions and making sure that we get them in the order that they come. Thank you so much. Appreciate everyone. Have a wonderful night.